There is a version of your life still waiting on the other side of every excuse you have quietly accepted from yourself, every permission you kept waiting for that was never actually required, every defeat you let define you long after the moment itself had passed. Somewhere along the way, most people absorb a set of invisible rules about what they are allowed to want, how fast they are allowed to move, and how much resistance is supposed to mean they should simply stop trying altogether. Almost none of these rules were ever written down, and almost none of them are actually true. 500 years ago, a sharp, unsentimental Florentine political thinker named Niccolò Machiavelli studied rulers who had lost everything: armies, territory, reputation, even their own freedom, and then rebuilt themselves into forces nobody could hold back a second time. He studied others who let a single defeat convince them the game was already over, who waited endlessly for permission that would never arrive, who handed their entire future over to the loudest critic in the room. The difference between these two outcomes was rarely talent, and it was almost never luck. It was a specific, learnable set of dark, unsentimental psychological truths about what actually holds people back, what actually breaks them, and what actually stops them cold. Truths most people never examine clearly enough to defend themselves against. Tonight, on The Hidden Mind, we are exposing exactly what those truths are, and exactly how to make yourself the kind of person that nobody and nothing can hold back, break, or stop again. Let's begin. Welcome to The Hidden Mind, the channel dedicated to uncovering the real mechanics of power, psychology, and human nature hiding beneath the surface of everyday life. If you are new here, you should know this is not a channel built around comfortable, feel-good affirmations. It is a channel built around the uncomfortable, unfiltered truths that actually change how you move through the world once you understand them clearly. Today's video pulls apart three of the most persistent forces working quietly against nearly everyone watching this right now: the invisible things that hold you back before you even begin, the specific mechanisms that break people who might otherwise have succeeded, and the particular traps that stop forward motion entirely, even for people who have already survived considerable difficulty to get as far as they have. We are drawing on Machiavelli's cold, clear-eyed study of rulers, rivals, and survivors throughout Renaissance Italy, extracting 9 distinct dark power lessons that explain exactly how to remove what holds you back, exactly how to become someone genuinely difficult to break, and exactly how to keep moving forward when everything around you seems designed to stop you cold. This is not comfortable material, and some of it will directly challenge beliefs you have carried for years about permission, failure, and resistance. But comfort has never built an unstoppable version of anyone, and this channel exists specifically to close that gap. Before we begin, I want to ask you for a few small things that genuinely matter to this channel and the community we are building here. If today's video gives you even one moment of real clarity, please take a couple of seconds to hit the like button. It is the simplest, most direct way to help this video reach more people who genuinely need it. Leave a comment below and tell us honestly what has been holding you back the most. We read every single comment, and they genuinely shape what we build here next. If you know someone who has been quietly waiting for permission, replaying an old defeat, or letting the loudest critic in their life set their direction, share this video with them. It might be exactly the shift they have been needing. And if you have not yet subscribed to The Hidden Mind, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications right now, because we release a brand new deep dive into power, psychology, and human nature every single week. Finally, if this channel provides real value to you, please consider supporting our work directly with a super thanks using the button below. Every single contribution genuinely helps us continue building this project. Now, let's get into exactly what holds people back, what breaks them, and what stops them, and exactly how Machiavelli believed you could become immune to all three. Why Machiavelli studied the unstoppable ones. Before we walk through the 9 lessons themselves, it is worth understanding why Machiavelli, of all the political thinkers writing in his era, became so specifically fascinated with the question of what separates people who get permanently derailed by adversity from people who absorb the exact same adversity and keep moving forward regardless. His own life gave him a deeply personal stake in this question. After serving the Florentine Republic for over a decade in genuine positions of diplomatic responsibility, He lost everything almost overnight, when the political winds shifted, stripped of his position, accused of conspiracy, imprisoned, and reportedly tortured before being released into a humiliating, impoverished exile on a small family farm. Many men in his exact position would have simply stayed broken, and history would never have heard from them again. Machiavelli did not stay broken. He picked up a pen in that same period of exile and produced the body of work that would eventually make his name known across the entire world for the next 5 centuries. This lived experience shaped his entire approach to studying power, timing, and resilience, because he was not simply an academic observer describing other people's downfall and recovery from a safe, comfortable distance. He was actively working out, in real time and under real personal pressure, exactly what separated a temporary setback from a permanent defeat. The 9 lessons we are about to walk through are drawn directly from this unusually personal, unusually hard-won body of understanding, organized around the 3 specific forces named in today's title. What holds people back before they even begin? What breaks people who might otherwise have succeeded? And what stops forward motion entirely once it has already started? Let's begin with the first category. Part 1. Nobody can hold you back. Lesson 1. Stop waiting for permission that was never coming. The first force that quietly holds an enormous number of people back is the deeply ingrained habit of waiting for some form of external permission, a title, a credential, an authority figure's explicit blessing, before allowing themselves to genuinely pursue something they actually want. Machiavelli observed that many of the political actors who never rose to genuine influence throughout his study of Renaissance Italy shared this exact pattern, a persistent deference toward established hierarchy and formal authorization that kept them waiting for a green light that the existing power structure had very little genuine incentive to ever actually provide. Meanwhile, the actors who did rise to genuine influence frequently shared the opposite trait, a willingness to act decisively based on their own judgment of the situation, seeking formal validation after the fact, once their actions had already produced results difficult to ignore, rather than waiting indefinitely for permission that formal structures rarely hand out freely to people they have not already decided to favor. Consider how directly this pattern applies to modern career and creative ambition. An employee with genuinely strong ideas about how a project or process could be improved frequently waits for a formal invitation to lead that initiative, deferring to whichever colleague happens to hold the relevant title, even when that colleague has shown no particular interest in actually pursuing the idea themselves. Meanwhile, a considerably less qualified but more decisive colleague simply begins doing the work, informally, without waiting for anyone's explicit blessing, and frequently ends up receiving the formal recognition and authority that the more qualified, more patient colleague was still waiting to be offered. This same pattern shows up constantly in creative and entrepreneurial pursuits, where aspiring writers, business owners, and artists frequently wait for some external authority, a publisher, an investor, a credentialing body, to formally validate their right to pursue their work seriously, when the considerably more effective path, the one Machiavelli's most successful subjects consistently took, involves beginning the actual work immediately, on your own initiative and by your own authority, and allowing external validation to arrive later, if it arrives at all, as a consequence of demonstrated results, rather than as a prerequisite for beginning in the first place. Lesson 2. Stop shrinking to make others comfortable. The second force holding people back concerns a genuinely painful, deeply ingrained habit that Machiavelli would have recognized immediately as a strategic error. The specific pattern of deliberately dimming your own ambition, capability, and presence in order to avoid making the people around you feel uncomfortable, threatened, or outperformed. Machiavelli observed that this instinct, however socially considerate it might feel in the moment, frequently cost genuinely capable people the recognition and advancement they had actually earned, because a leader or advisor who consistently downplayed their own competence in deference to others' comfort trained everyone around them to genuinely underestimate what they were actually capable of. an underestimation that then became remarkably difficult to correct once it had calcified into the group's settled, comfortable assumption about that person's actual limits. Consider how this pattern shows up relentlessly in modern professional and social settings. A genuinely skilled team member consistently softens their own contributions in meetings, deferring credit to colleagues, downplaying the significance of their own ideas, and generally minimizing their own visible presence, out of a genuine, considerate desire not to overshadow teammates who might feel threatened by more visible competence. Over time, this considerate habit produces a genuinely costly outcome. The entire team, including leadership making promotion and resource allocation decisions, comes to see this person as genuinely less capable and less ambitious than they actually are, simply because that person has spent years actively training everyone around them to hold exactly that mistaken impression. This does not mean becoming needlessly boastful or inconsiderate of others' genuine feelings. It means recognizing, clearly and honestly, the specific moments where dimming your own light has stopped being genuine consideration and has become a habitual, costly pattern of self-erasure, and practicing the deliberately uncomfortable skill of allowing your genuine capability and ambition to remain visible, even when doing so means someone else in the room briefly feels less comfortable as a direct result. Lesson 3. Stop measuring yourself against a timeline that was never yours. The third force holding people back concerns the specific, quietly corrosive habit of measuring your own progress and timeline against other people's, a habit that Machiavelli would have recognized as a fundamental strategic error, since he understood clearly that circumstances, resources, and starting positions varied enormously between different political actors, making any direct comparison of relative progress considerably less meaningful than most people instinctively assume it to be. Consider how relentlessly this pattern shows up in ordinary modern life, where social comparison has become almost unavoidable given how visible other people's apparent progress and success has become through modern communication and social media. Someone genuinely working hard toward a meaningful career or personal goal frequently finds their own motivation and self-assessment quietly undermined by constant awareness of peers who appear, at least from the outside, to be progressing considerably faster along a broadly similar path, without any real visibility into the different starting resources, different circumstances, or different obstacles that peer may have actually navigated to reach that apparent progress. This comparison frequently produces a genuinely damaging conclusion that falling behind an arbitrary, externally generated timeline constitutes meaningful evidence of personal failure or inadequate effort, when in reality the comparison itself was never a meaningful or fair measure of anything in the first place, given how enormously individual circumstances actually differ beneath the surface similarity of two people pursuing broadly comparable goals. Machiavelli's antidote here asks you to develop a considerably more honest, considerably more individualized sense of your own actual progress, measured against your own specific starting point, your own specific obstacles, and your own specific resources, rather than against an external timeline that was constructed, almost entirely, from incomplete information about someone else's genuinely different circumstances. Part 2. Nobody can break you. Lesson 4. Treat setbacks as data, not verdicts. Moving from what holds people back before they begin to what actually breaks people who have already started. The fourth lesson concerns one of the single most important psychological distinctions Machiavelli's own life forced him to confront directly. The difference between treating a setback as useful information about what to adjust going forward and treating that same setback as a final, permanent verdict on your own fundamental worth or capability. Machiavelli's own catastrophic political downfall, his imprisonment, his torture, his humiliating exile, could easily have been interpreted, by a less resilient man, as definitive proof that he had fundamentally failed, that his judgment and his career were permanently, irreparably broken. Instead, he treated this devastating setback as, in effect, an enormous quantity of genuinely valuable data about how political power actually operates. Data he then used to produce the body of work that ultimately outlasted every single political rival who had contributed to his downfall in the first place. Consider how this same distinction applies to ordinary modern setbacks. A business venture that fails can be interpreted, by the person who experienced it, as definitive proof that they simply are not capable of successful entrepreneurship, a verdict that frequently ends any future attempt before it even begins. Or that same failure can be interpreted as genuinely valuable data, specific information about which assumptions were wrong, which market signals were misread, which particular execution choices produced the actual failure, data that considerably improves the odds of success in a subsequent attempt, provided the person experiencing the setback treats it as information to be studied rather than as a permanent verdict to be accepted. This distinction, treating setbacks as data rather than verdicts, is genuinely difficult to practice consistently, particularly in the emotionally raw period immediately following a significant failure. But it is precisely this distinction that separated Machiavelli's own remarkable resilience from the considerably more common pattern of allowing a single significant setback to permanently end further attempts at whatever goal had originally been pursued. Lesson 5. Refuse to let old defeats cast a vote in new battles. The fifth lesson concerns a genuinely important, closely related pattern, the specific danger of allowing a past defeat to continue exerting influence over present decisions long after that defeat's actual relevance to the current situation has expired. Machiavelli observed that political actors who had experienced a significant past betrayal or defeat frequently carried an excessive, poorly calibrated caution into entirely new situations and relationships that bore little genuine resemblance to the original circumstances that produced their earlier defeat, a pattern that frequently cost these actors genuine new opportunities that a more accurately calibrated assessment of present circumstances would have allowed them to pursue confidently. Consider how this pattern plays out in ordinary modern relationships and professional decisions. Someone who experienced a genuinely painful betrayal in a past romantic relationship frequently carries an excessive, poorly calibrated suspicion into entirely new relationships with entirely different people, treating every new partner as though they carry the same risk profile as the specific person who caused the original harm. A pattern that frequently prevents genuine connection with people who have given no actual evidence of deserving that same suspicion. Someone who experienced a significant professional failure in one specific venture or role frequently carries an excessive, generalized caution into entirely different professional opportunities that bear little genuine resemblance to the original circumstances of that earlier failure, allowing an old defeat to effectively cast a vote against present opportunities that this old defeat has no genuine, evidence-based standing to actually influence. Machiavelli's antidote here asks you to develop the specific discipline of evaluating each new situation, relationship, and opportunity primarily on its own actual, present merits and evidence, actively noticing and correcting for the specific ways an old defeat may be quietly distorting your present judgment, rather than allowing that old defeat to continue exerting an outsized, poorly calibrated influence over decisions that genuinely deserve a fresh, accurate assessment on their own actual terms. Lesson 6. Stop spending your strength on battles that do not matter. The sixth lesson concerns a genuinely practical, strategic insight about resilience that Machiavelli returned to repeatedly throughout his writing. The recognition that a person or leader who insists on fighting every single available battle, regardless of that battle's actual significance to their broader goals, inevitably exhausts the genuine strength and resources they will eventually need for the battles that actually matter, leaving them considerably more vulnerable at precisely the moments genuine strength and reserve are most critically needed. Consider how this pattern shows up in ordinary modern life, where an enormous number of people expend genuine emotional and practical energy contesting minor, ultimately insignificant conflicts, an online disagreement with a stranger, a minor slight from an acquaintance, a trivial dispute over an inconsequential detail, energy that, spent repeatedly across countless minor battles, leaves considerably less genuine reserve available when a truly significant conflict or challenge eventually arrives and actually requires real strength and full attention to navigate successfully. Machiavelli's own strategic thinking consistently emphasized the importance of discernment, correctly identifying which conflicts genuinely warranted a full, decisive response, and which conflicts were better handled through strategic disengagement, precisely so that genuine strength remained available and undiminished for the battles that actually mattered to a person's broader, longer-term goals. This lesson asks you to develop the genuine discipline of auditing, where your own strength and energy are currently being spent, identifying the minor, ultimately insignificant battles currently draining genuine reserve without producing any meaningful benefit to your broader goals, and deliberately redirecting that energy away from these minor skirmishes and toward the genuine reserve you will need available when a battle that actually matters eventually, inevitably arrives. Part 3. Nobody can stop you. Lesson 7. Stop waiting for unanimous approval before you move. Moving from what breaks people who have already begun to what stops forward motion entirely. The 7th lesson concerns a genuinely common but genuinely costly pattern, the habit of waiting for universal agreement or unanimous approval from everyone in your life before allowing yourself to move forward on a genuinely important decision or pursuit. Machiavelli observed clearly that unanimous approval was, in nearly every meaningful political decision he studied, essentially impossible to achieve, because any decision significant enough to actually matter inevitably affected different people's interests differently, guaranteeing that at least some portion of any relevant audience would object, regardless of how genuinely sound the underlying decision actually was. Leaders who waited for unanimous approval before acting on significant decisions, in effect, waited forever, because that unanimous approval was structurally never going to arrive, while leaders who developed the confidence to act decisively once they had secured sufficient, though never universal support, moved forward while their more cautious counterparts remained permanently stalled, waiting for a condition that was never actually achievable in the first place. Consider how directly this pattern applies to modern personal and professional decisions. Someone considering a significant career change, a major relocation, or an important personal decision frequently seeks input from a wide circle of friends, family, and colleagues, hoping to gather enough support and validation to feel genuinely confident moving forward, only to discover that this wider circle inevitably contains at least some genuine skeptics and objectors, regardless of how sound the underlying decision actually is, because any decision significant enough to matter will always affect different people's comfort and expectations differently. Machiavelli's antidote here asks you to develop a genuinely more realistic standard for the actual level of support required before moving forward on a significant decision, recognizing clearly that unanimous approval was never a realistic or necessary bar to clear, and that sufficient support from the people whose judgment you genuinely trust most, combined with your own carefully considered assessment of the situation, constitutes a genuinely adequate foundation for decisive action, regardless of how many other voices in your broader circle continue to raise objections that were, in a meaningful sense, always going to exist no matter what you eventually decided to do. Lesson 8. Trust your capacity to adapt more than your current skill set. The 8th lesson concerns a genuinely important insight about the relationship between your current, present capability and your genuine capacity for growth and adaptation, an insight Machiavelli returned to repeatedly when discussing why certain leaders survive dramatic shifts in political circumstance, while others, seemingly equally capable at any given moment, ultimately failed once circumstances shifted in ways their existing skill set had not specifically prepared them for. Machiavelli observed that the leaders who survived and thrived across genuinely turbulent, unpredictable political circumstances were rarely the ones who happened to already possess every skill a future crisis would eventually demand, an impossible standard given how genuinely unpredictable political circumstance actually proved to be, but rather the ones who trusted their own genuine capacity to learn, adapt, and develop new capability quickly once circumstances actually demanded it, allowing them to move forward confidently into genuinely uncertain situations rather than remaining permanently stalled, waiting to first acquire every skill that an uncertain future might conceivably require. Consider how directly this insight applies to modern career and personal development. An enormous number of people decline genuinely valuable opportunities, a promotion, a new role, a significant creative or entrepreneurial pursuit, specifically because they do not yet possess every single skill that role or pursuit will eventually require. Treating this current skill gap as definitive proof that they are not genuinely capable of the opportunity, rather than recognizing that genuine capacity to adapt and develop new skill under real pressure and real motivation frequently matters considerably more than whatever specific skill set happens to already be in place at the exact moment an opportunity first presents itself. Machiavelli's antidote here asks you to develop genuine trust in your own demonstrated history of learning and adapting under real pressure in the past, using that genuine track record as considerably more reliable evidence of your actual future capability than your current present skill gap, which will almost certainly close considerably faster than you currently expect, once genuine motivation and real circumstance actually demand that it does. Lesson 9. Stop letting the loudest critic set your direction. The ninth and final lesson concerns a genuinely important insight about the disproportionate influence a small number of vocal critics frequently exert over decisions that should, by any reasonable measure, be evaluated on considerably broader and more balanced evidence. Machiavelli observed that political actors frequently allowed a small number of particularly loud, particularly persistent critics to exert an influence over their decision-making considerably out of proportion to that critic's actual relevance, expertise, or stake in the outcome, simply because sustained, vocal criticism tends to feel psychologically louder and more urgent than the quieter, more measured support or indifference of the considerably larger audience who never bothered to comment at all. A single, particularly vocal critic, a family member who disapproves of a career choice, a single harsh comment on creative work shared publicly, one persistently skeptical colleague, frequently exerts an outsized, disproportionate influence over someone's subsequent decisions and confidence, considerably more influence than the quieter support or simple indifference of everyone else in their life, who either approves or, more commonly, simply does not have a strong opinion on the matter at all. This disproportionate influence occurs not because the loud critic's opinion is actually more valid or better informed than everyone else's, but simply because loud, persistent criticism registers more vividly and more memorably in our attention than quiet approval or genuine indifference, a psychological quirk that Machiavelli's most successful political subjects consistently learn to correct for deliberately, weighing critical feedback according to its actual substance and the critic's actual relevant expertise, rather than according to how loudly and persistently that criticism happened to be delivered. Machiavelli's antidote here asks you to develop the specific discipline of actively, deliberately weighing feedback and criticism according to its actual substance and the genuine relevance of its source, rather than allowing volume and persistence alone to determine how much weight any single voice receives in your own decision-making, a discipline that frequently reveals, once genuinely applied, that the single loudest critic in your life was never actually the most relevant or informed voice in the room to begin with. Bringing the 9 lessons together. Having walked through all 9 of these dark power lessons, organized across what holds people back, what breaks them, and what stops them entirely, it is worth stepping back to see the coherent, unified philosophy, connecting them into a single, practical approach to becoming genuinely difficult to hold back, break, or stop. Refusing to wait for permission, refusing to shrink for others' comfort, and refusing to measure yourself against timelines that were never yours, together dismantle the specific patterns that hold ambitious, capable people back before they have even genuinely begun pursuing what they actually want. Treating setbacks as data rather than verdicts, refusing to let old defeats vote in new battles, and conserving your genuine strength for the conflicts that actually matter, together build the specific resilience required to remain unbroken by adversity that would otherwise permanently derail a less strategically minded person. And refusing to wait for unanimous approval, trusting your genuine capacity to adapt beyond your current skill set, and refusing to let the loudest critic set your direction together, remove the specific obstacles that stop forward motion entirely, even for people who have already successfully navigated the earlier stages of holding back and breaking that this video has described. Together, these 9 lessons describe something considerably more powerful than simple positive thinking or empty motivational encouragement. They describe a genuinely practical, psychologically grounded framework for removing the specific, identifiable mechanisms that have likely been working against you, quietly and largely unnoticed, for a considerable portion of your life. Mechanisms Machiavelli identified with unusual clarity precisely because his own life forced him to confront and overcome every single one of them directly, under genuinely difficult, genuinely high-stakes circumstances. Why these 9 patterns feel so invisible until named clearly? There is a genuinely important question worth sitting with before we move toward practical application. Why patterns as significant as the 9 discussed throughout today's video, patterns capable of holding back, breaking, or stopping an entire life's trajectory, so frequently remain completely invisible to the people actually experiencing them, until they are named clearly and directly, the way we have attempted to do today. Part of the answer lies in the simple fact that each of these 9 patterns tends to feel, from the inside, like genuine wisdom or genuine virtue rather than a costly limitation. Waiting for permission feels like appropriate humility and respect for established process. Shrinking to make others comfortable feels like genuine kindness and consideration. Measuring yourself against others' timelines feels like healthy self-awareness and realistic goal setting. Treating a setback as a permanent verdict feels like honest self-assessment rather than excessive pessimism. Letting an old defeat vote in new battles feels like reasonable caution earned through genuine past experience. Fighting every available battle feels like principled consistency rather than strategic waste. Waiting for unanimous approval feels like appropriate care and consideration for everyone affected by a decision. Waiting to acquire every skill before pursuing an opportunity feels like responsible preparation rather than unnecessary delay. And weighing the loudest critic's opinion heavily feels like genuine open-mindedness and willingness to hear difficult feedback. Each of these patterns disguises itself, quite convincingly, as a genuine virtue, which is precisely why so few people ever examine them critically enough to notice the actual cost these apparent virtues are quietly extracting from their own lives over time. Machiavelli's genuine contribution here was not simply identifying that these patterns exist. Most reasonably self-aware people could eventually arrive at that same basic observation, given enough time and reflection, but rather his willingness to look directly at the actual cost these apparently virtuous patterns produced. In real political outcomes, among real historical figures whose fates he had access to study clearly, rather than accepting the comfortable, virtue-disguised version of each pattern at face value, the way most casual observation tends to do. This is precisely why today's video has spent considerable time not simply naming these 9 patterns, but walking through the specific, concrete ways they actually cost real people real opportunities and real outcomes. Because abstract awareness of a pattern rarely produces genuine behavioral change on its own, while a clear, concrete understanding of the actual cost that pattern has already extracted from your own specific life tends to motivate genuine change considerably more effectively. Machiavelli's own proof that none of this is theoretical. It is worth returning, one final time before we move toward practical application, to the genuinely remarkable specifics of Machiavelli's own biography, because his life offers something considerably more valuable than a simple, comfortable motivational anecdote. It offers a genuinely detailed, historically documented case study in exactly what today's 9 lessons look like when actually applied under real, devastating pressure. After the Medici family returned to power in Florence in 1512, Machiavelli was removed from his government position and shortly afterward became implicated, likely wrongly, in a conspiracy against the new ruling family. He was imprisoned in the Bargello, Florence's notorious prison, and subjected to a brutal form of torture known as strapado, in which the victim's hands are bound behind their back and they are hoisted into the air by a rope, dislocating their shoulders under their own body weight. He endured this treatment while steadfastly maintaining his innocence, and was eventually released as part of a general amnesty, stripped of his position, his income, and his standing in the political community he had devoted the majority of his adult career to serving. He retreated to a small family property outside Florence, considerably reduced in circumstances, spending his days managing modest agricultural affairs, and his evenings, as he described in his own surviving letters, changing into formal clothing and imagining himself once again in conversation with the great political and historical figures whose lives he continued studying closely, despite having lost every formal platform from which his own political voice had once carried real, genuine influence. It was from this position, genuinely broken by any reasonable external measure, imprisoned, tortured, exiled, and stripped of the career he had spent over a decade building, that he produced The Prince, along with the broader body of work that would eventually secure his lasting historical reputation considerably more thoroughly than his actual government career ever had while he was still actively serving in it. He did not wait for permission to begin writing, having received none of the formal encouragement or platform he had once possessed. He did not treat his imprisonment and exile as a permanent verdict on his own relevance, despite having every reasonable justification to reach that exact conclusion. He did not allow the specific betrayal that led to his downfall to convince him that all future political engagement, even the considerably more modest engagement of writing from exile, was similarly doomed to fail. He did not wait for unanimous approval from the political establishment that had just finished disgracing him. And he did not allow the considerable number of loud voices celebrating his downfall in that exact moment to convince him that his own continued intellectual and political relevance had been permanently settled by their judgment. Every single one of the 9 lessons discussed throughout today's video is, in a very real and specific sense, simply a description of the psychological discipline Machiavelli's own life forced him to develop and apply under genuinely extreme circumstances. Discipline he then distilled into the broader philosophy that has continued shaping how readers think about power, resilience, and ambition for the past 5 centuries. How to actually start applying these 9 lessons. Understanding these 9 lessons intellectually is a meaningful first step, but genuinely internalizing them requires deliberate, ongoing practice applied to your own specific circumstances, not simply passive agreement with the ideas presented throughout today's video. Begin with an honest audit of your own current life, identifying specifically which of these 9 patterns currently exerts the strongest hold over your own decisions and self-perception. If waiting for permission is your primary pattern, identify one specific pursuit you have been delaying, specifically because you have not yet received some form of external validation or authorization, and consider what a genuine first step, taken entirely on your own initiative and authority, might actually look like this week. If shrinking for others' comfort is your primary pattern, identify one specific situation where you have been consistently downplaying your own genuine contribution or capability, and practice allowing your actual competence to remain visible in that specific situation going forward. If comparing your timeline to others is your primary pattern, practice consciously redirecting your attention, whenever you notice this comparison beginning, toward your own specific starting point, your own specific obstacles, and your own specific progress measured honestly against where you actually began, rather than against someone else's genuinely different circumstances. If treating setbacks as verdicts is your primary pattern, choose one significant past setback and practice deliberately reframing it, in writing if possible, as a specific collection of useful data points about what to adjust going forward, rather than as a permanent judgment about your own fundamental capability. If old defeats are quietly voting in new battles, identify one current relationship or opportunity where an old, unrelated defeat may be exerting undue influence over your present judgment, and practice evaluating that current situation specifically on its own actual present merits. If you have been spending your strength on minor battles, conduct an honest audit of where your energy has been going this past month, and identify at least one minor, ultimately insignificant conflict you can consciously disengage from starting today. If waiting for unanimous approval is your primary pattern, identify the specific handful of people whose judgment you genuinely trust most, and practice treating their support, combined with your own careful assessment, as a genuinely sufficient foundation for action, regardless of how many other voices continue to object. If underestimating your capacity to adapt is your primary pattern, review your own past history of successfully learning and adapting under real pressure, and use that genuine track record, rather than your current skill gap, as your primary evidence when evaluating a new opportunity. And if the loudest critic in your life has been setting your direction, practice the specific discipline of weighing that critic's feedback according to their actual relevant expertise and the substance of what they are actually saying, rather than according to how loudly or persistently they continue saying it. A final reflection on becoming genuinely unstoppable. Before we close today's video, it is worth sitting honestly with what these 9 lessons are actually working to build. Because it was never simply about achieving more, accumulating more success, or outpacing everyone else around you for its own sake. It was about removing the specific, identifiable obstacles that have likely been operating quietly against you for a considerable portion of your life. Obstacles most people never examine clearly enough to actually dismantle, simply because nobody ever taught them that these obstacles were optional in the first place, rather than a fixed, unavoidable feature of how ambition, resilience, and forward motion are simply supposed to work. Machiavelli's own life stands as a genuinely compelling proof of concept for everything discussed throughout today's video. He lost his position, his reputation, his freedom, and very nearly his life, and rather than allowing that devastating setback to become the permanent verdict a less resilient man might have accepted, he treated it as data, refused to let it cast an endless vote against his own continued relevance, and produced, from a position of genuine exile and genuine loss, the body of work that ultimately outlasted every single rival who had contributed to his downfall in the first place. Nobody handed him permission to write The Prince. Nobody unanimously approved of his continued relevance after his political disgrace. He simply refused to let the loudest voices of his moment, the ones celebrating his downfall, set the actual direction of the rest of his life. This is ultimately what becoming genuinely unstoppable actually looks like, not the absence of genuine setback, opposition, or defeat, all of which Machiavelli experienced in genuinely devastating measure, but the specific, learnable refusal to let any of it hold you back, break you, or stop you from continuing to move deliberately toward what you actually want. A warning about confusing unstoppable with reckless. Before we close today's video, it is worth addressing directly a genuine risk that can emerge when material this focused on removing internal obstacles is applied without appropriate discernment. The risk of confusing genuine, psychologically grounded resilience with genuine recklessness, ignoring legitimate warning signs and legitimate feedback simply because today's video has encouraged you to stop being held back, broken, or stopped by external opinion. This distinction matters enormously, and Machiavelli himself, despite his reputation for boldness, was consistently careful to draw it clearly throughout his own writing. Refusing to wait for permission that was never actually required is meaningfully different from ignoring genuine safety concerns, genuine legal requirements, or genuine ethical obligations that exist for entirely legitimate reasons, and today's first lesson was never intended to encourage bypassing genuine, meaningful checks that exist to protect real interests, only the countless informal, unnecessary permissions people frequently wait for out of habit, rather than genuine necessity. Refusing to let the loudest critic set your direction is meaningfully different from refusing to hear any critical feedback at all, regardless of its actual substance or the genuine expertise behind it. And today's 9th lesson specifically asked you to weigh feedback according to its actual merit and relevance, not to dismiss all criticism reflexively simply because it happened to be delivered loudly or persistently. Trusting your capacity to adapt beyond your current skill set is meaningfully different from pursuing genuinely dangerous undertakings, surgery, aviation, activities involving other people's safety and well-being, where a genuine, demonstrated baseline of competence remains a legitimate, non-negotiable requirement, rather than something to be waved away through pure confidence in your own future adaptability. The genuine goal of everything discussed throughout today's video was never to encourage recklessness disguised as boldness. It was to help you accurately distinguish between the countless internal obstacles that genuinely deserve to be dismantled, the invisible permissions, the excessive deference to others' comfort, the disproportionate weight given to loud but poorly informed criticism, and the genuinely legitimate external realities, safety, ethics, demonstrated competence in high-stakes domains that that deserve your continued respect and careful attention, regardless of how emboldened today's 9 lessons have made you feel. Developing this specific discernment, the ability to tell genuinely limiting internal obstacles apart from genuinely legitimate external realities, is ultimately the mark of someone who has actually internalized Machiavelli's philosophy correctly, rather than someone who has simply extracted a convenient license for recklessness from material that was never actually intended to provide one. What actually changes once you stop waiting? There is one final observation worth sharing before we move toward today's close. A pattern that tends to emerge reliably once someone has genuinely begun applying even a handful of the 9 lessons discussed throughout this video, rather than simply agreeing with them intellectually without any accompanying change in actual behavior. The specific external obstacles that once felt like genuinely insurmountable barriers, the missing permission, the unanimous disapproval, the loud critic's persistent objection, frequently turn out, once actually tested directly, rather than avoided indefinitely, to be considerably less solid and considerably less consequential than they appeared from a safe, comfortable distance. This is not because the obstacles themselves were never genuinely real. Some of them certainly were, but because the psychological weight most people assign to these obstacles in advance, before ever actually testing them directly, tends to be considerably exaggerated compared to how these same obstacles actually play out once genuinely confronted, rather than simply imagined and avoided. Machiavelli understood this dynamic clearly from his own repeated observation of political actors who spent years avoiding a confrontation or decision they assumed would be catastrophic, only to discover, once genuinely forced to face it directly, that the actual consequences were considerably more survivable than their own imagination had spent years insisting they would be. This is precisely the discovery waiting on the other side of genuinely applying the 9 lessons discussed throughout today's video. Not that every obstacle in your path is secretly imaginary or without genuine consequence, but that a considerable portion of what has been quietly holding you back, breaking you, and stopping you across your own life has likely been considerably less solid than it has felt from the comfortable distance of continuing to avoid it. And the only way to genuinely discover this for yourself is to finally stop waiting, stop shrinking, stop measuring, stop treating setbacks as verdicts, stop letting old defeats vote, stop fighting every battle, stop waiting for unanimous approval, stop underestimating your own adaptability, and stop letting the loudest voice in the room continue setting the direction of a life that was always, genuinely, yours alone to direct. That brings us to the end of today's deep dive into Machiavelli's Dark Power Lessons on what actually holds people back, what actually breaks them, and what actually stops them, and exactly how to become genuinely immune to all 3. Stop waiting for permission that was never actually coming. Stop shrinking your genuine capability to make other people comfortable. Stop measuring your own progress against a timeline that was genuinely never yours to begin with. Treat every setback as useful data rather than a permanent verdict on your own worth. Refuse to let old defeats continue casting a vote in entirely new battles that bear no genuine resemblance to the circumstances that produced them. Stop spending your genuine strength on minor battles that do not actually matter to your broader goals. Stop waiting for unanimous approval that was structurally never going to arrive. Trust your own genuine, demonstrated capacity to adapt considerably more than your current present skill set. And stop letting the single loudest critic in your life set the direction for the rest of it. Carry these 9 lessons with you, not as empty motivational encouragement, but as a genuinely practical, psychologically grounded framework for dismantling the specific obstacles that have likely been working quietly against you for a considerable portion of your life, until this exact moment. Before you go, I want to ask you once more for a few small things that genuinely matter to this channel. If today's video gave you real clarity about what has actually been holding you back, please take a moment to hit the like button. It costs you nothing and directly helps this video reach more people who genuinely need to hear it. Leave a comment below and tell us honestly which of these 9 lessons hit closest to home for you. We read every single comment, and they genuinely shape the direction of future videos here on The Hidden Mind. If someone in your life has been quietly waiting for permission, carrying an old defeat into new battles, or letting the loudest critic set their entire direction. Please share this video with them today. It might be exactly the shift they have been needing. And if you have not yet subscribed to The Hidden Mind, now is the perfect moment. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our weekly deep dives into power, psychology, and the hidden mechanics of human resilience and ambition. Finally, if this video delivered genuine value to you and you would like to directly support the growth of this channel, please consider leaving a super thanks using the button below. Every single contribution genuinely helps us continue building content exactly like this for you. Until next time, remember that nobody was ever actually holding you back, except the invisible rules you quietly agreed to follow. Nobody was ever actually capable of breaking you, except your own decision to treat a setback as a final verdict. And nobody was ever actually able to stop you, except your own willingness to keep waiting for a permission and an approval that were never actually required in the first place. This has been The Hidden Mind, and we will see you again in the next one.